Before we begin, a quick and important disclaimer. The information presented in this video is for educational, historical, and entertainment purposes only. Discussions surrounding divorce inevitably touch upon complex legal, financial, tax, and emotional matters. This content does not constitute professional legal counsel, financial advising, or marital therapy. Because family law varies drastically by state jurisdiction and individual circumstances, viewers are strongly urged to conduct their own due diligence and consult with qualified professionals, such as family law attorneys or certified financial planners, before making any major life decisions. In 1981, the United States hit a statistical high watermark that terrified sociologists, policymakers, and traditionalists alike. The national divorce rate peaked at an unprecedented 5.3 divorces per 1,000 people. For decades, a single haunting statistic has been drilled into the American psyche. 50% of all marriages end in failure. It is a number so ubiquitous that it has shaped everything from Hollywood romantic comedies to prenuptial agreement negotiations and generational cynicism about love. But what if that defining cultural metric is not only outdated, but fundamentally misunderstood in the modern landscape? Today, we are witnessing a massive silent upheaval in how Americans view the entire trajectory of the matrimonial breakdown. We are living through a massive generational divide where the very definition of a successful relationship is being rewritten under our noses. While older generations often viewed the dissolution of a marriage as a profound personal and social failure, a catastrophic mark of shame to be avoided at all costs, younger Americans are increasingly viewing the process through an entirely different lens. It is no longer universally seen as an end, but rather as a complex, sometimes necessary pivot toward individual autonomy, mental well-being, and financial self-preservation. Yet, navigating this structural shift comes with staggering hidden costs, systemic legal traps, and psychological warfare that most couples never see coming until they are already deep in the system. The reality of how we got here, and where the institution of marriage is heading next, involves a web of shifting legal frameworks, economic realities, and deeply ingrained cultural myths that continue to govern our private lives. This video serves as a comprehensive deep dive into the evolution of the American divorce journey, designed to deconstruct the exact socio-economic and psychological mechanisms that define modern relationship dissolution in the United States. For anyone trying to understand the shifting tides of American society, or anyone evaluating the long-term realities of modern partnerships, this masterclass solves a critical problem. It strips away the outdated myths, emotional biases, and toxic stigmas to provide a clear, data-driven, and historical blueprint of how the system actually operates. We will break down why the 50% divorce myth persists, how the introduction of no-fault divorce fundamentally altered the American family structure, and how modern couples are shifting toward alternative frameworks like collaborative mediation and conscious uncoupling. By examining historical trends, landmark legal shifts, and real-world case studies, this retrospective will give you a clear, unvarnished understanding of the modern American relationship landscape, allowing you to see past the cultural noise and comprehend the true mechanics of how couples navigate the legal and emotional realities of parting ways in the 21st century. To truly understand how Americans view the dissolution of marriage today, we have to look at the historical trajectory that brought us to this point. For the first 2 centuries of American history, the legal framework governing the end of a marriage was rooted in a fault-based system. This meant that in order for a court to grant a dissolution, one party had to prove definitive wrongdoing by the other. The legally recognized grounds were strict and narrow: habitual cruelty, physical desertion, bigamy, or open adultery. This framework created an adversarial environment from the very first filing. It forced couples into a binary dynamic of an innocent victim and a guilty perpetrator. Case studies from the mid-20th century reveal a bizarre and often dystopian legal subculture, where couples who mutually agreed that their marriage was over had to resort to collusion and fabricated evidence. Husbands and wives would literally hire private investigators and actors to stage photographs of infidelity, just to satisfy the statutory requirements of the court. The process was inherently humiliating, prohibitively expensive, and deeply stigmatized. Society viewed the breakdown of a home as a moral failing, and the legal system reflected that by demanding a public display of sin before granting freedom. The turning point came in 1969, when California Governor Ronald Reagan signed the Family Law Act, officially introducing the concept of no-fault divorce to the United States. This legal shift allowed couples to terminate a marriage based simply on irreconcilable differences, requiring no proof of wrongdoing from either party. Over the next 2 decades, virtually every state in the Union followed suit. The introduction of no-fault systems fundamentally altered the power dynamics within American households. Historical data indicates that the immediate aftermath of these legislative changes saw a significant spike in filings, as individuals who had been trapped in deeply unhappy or abusive relationships finally had a viable legal exit strategy. Sociological studies tracking this era note a measurable decline in domestic violence rates and female suicide rates in states that adopted no-fault laws, highlighting the profound intersection between family law and public health. However, this legal revolution also triggered a massive cultural backlash. Critics argued that stripping away the requirement of fault made the dissolution of marriage too easy, undermining the stability of the nuclear family, and leading directly to the skyrocketing rates observed in the late 1970s and early 1980s. This brings us to the origins of the infamous 50% statistic. During the peak of the divorce boom in the early 1980s, demographers looking at the raw data noticed a trend. The number of marriages taking place in a given year was roughly double the number of dissolutions occurring in that same time frame. Mathematical projections based on those specific contemporary trends suggested that if those rates remained constant, approximately half of all marriages entered into during that era would eventually end. Over time, this projection was flattened by the media into an absolute, unchanging law of nature. But human behavior is not static. What the public failed to realize is that the spike of the late 20th century was a historical anomaly, driven by a specific convergence of social factors. The sudden availability of no-fault laws, the rapid entry of women into the workforce, and the changing cultural expectations of the baby boomer generation. When we look at the data from the current era, a completely different picture emerges. The overall rate in the United States has been steadily declining for the past several decades. This decline is not necessarily because marriages have become magically more stable, but because the demographics of who gets married, and when, have shifted entirely. Younger generations, specifically millennials and Generation Z, are delaying marriage until much later in life compared to their parents and grandparents. They are entering into legal unions with higher levels of educational attainment, greater financial stability, and a more mature understanding of compatibility. Furthermore, the widespread social acceptance of cohabitation before marriage acts as a natural filtering mechanism. Couples are living together, blending their finances, and testing their long-term compatibility without a legal contract, meaning that many relationships that would have ended in a formal filing 40 years ago now dissolve without ever entering the legal statistics. Consequently, the risk profile for modern marriages is highly stratified based on socioeconomic status, age at the time of union, and education level, completely debunking the idea of a universal 50-50 coin toss. To map out the modern landscape of relationship dissolution in the United States, we must first analyze the profound socioeconomic divide that has emerged over the last several decades, creating two entirely different realities for American couples. Demographers frequently refer to this phenomenon as the marriage gap or the marriage divide. Imagine a scenario involving a citizen named Michael living in 2026. Michael is a college-educated professional working in a major metropolitan area who married his partner at age 31, after both had established stable professional trajectories. In Michael's demographic group, statistical data demonstrates that the likelihood of a marriage lasting past the 10-year mark is exceptionally high. Conversely, consider another citizen named Sarah, who lives in a rural region, completed a high school education, and married at age 21 while working an hourly retail job. For individuals in Sarah's demographic, historical trends indicate a vastly different statistical trajectory, with significantly higher rates of relationship termination within the first decade of marriage. This socioeconomic stratification means that family stability in the United States has increasingly become a luxury good. Individuals with higher levels of formal education and higher household incomes possess a robust financial cushion that helps mitigate the primary stressor in many domestic arguments: money. When economic anxiety is minimized, the baseline friction within a household decreases. Furthermore, college-educated professionals are marrying later in life, allowing for greater emotional maturity and psychological readiness. On the flip side, lower-income couples often face systemic economic pressures, unpredictable work schedules, and a lack of access to mental health resources or marital counseling, all of which compound marital distress. This socioeconomic divergence directly influences how different segments of the American public view the process of parting ways. For some, it is seen as an expensive legal maneuver that protects significant assets. For others, it is a catastrophic financial destabilizer that plunges a single-parent household directly into economic vulnerability. Beyond the socioeconomic divide lies a massive shift in the psychological and philosophical expectations that Americans bring to the institution of marriage. Historically, a successful marriage was measured largely by institutional stability, economic cooperation, and the successful rearing of children. If a couple managed to stay under the same roof for 50 years without public scandal, the marriage was deemed an absolute success, regardless of the emotional distance or resentment festering behind closed doors. Today, the modern American viewpoint has transitioned from an institutional model to what sociologists call an expressive or soulmate model of marriage. Americans now demand that their partnership serve as a vehicle for personal growth, deep emotional fulfillment, intellectual compatibility, and self-actualization. When a relationship fails to deliver these high-level psychological needs, modern partners are increasingly unwilling to endure decades of quiet desperation simply to preserve an institutional contract. This evolution in thought has transformed how society perceives the act of ending a relationship. Rather than viewing the decision as a catastrophic moral failure or a breach of duty, contemporary culture increasingly frames it as a brave, albeit painful, choice to pursue personal well-being and authenticity. This shift is deeply evident in popular media, literature, and the language used by public figures, which frequently emphasizes the concept of personal reinvention and the rejection of toxic environments. However, transitioning a relationship out of the traditional marital framework involves navigating a complex and highly specialized financial ecosystem that catches many couples completely off guard. One of the most significant and least understood components of this journey is the division of marital property, which operates under two distinct legal doctrines depending on the state of residence: equitable distribution or community property. In community property states like California, Texas, and Washington, the legal framework is rigid, mandating an exact 50-50 split of all assets and debts acquired during the marriage, regardless of who earned the income or whose name is on the title. In equitable distribution states, which comprise the majority of the country, the court is tasked with dividing property in a manner that is fair but not necessarily equal. To understand how this plays out in real-world case studies, imagine if a couple in an equitable distribution state goes to court to divide their assets. The judge will analyze a multitude of factors, including the length of the marriage, the earning capacity of each spouse, the age and health of the parties, and the non-monetary contributions made by a stay-at-home parent. A stay-at-home spouse who sacrificed a career to raise children and manage the household might be awarded a larger percentage of the marital property to offset their diminished earning potential in the modern workforce. This system is designed to prevent a financially dominant spouse from leaving the non-earning spouse entirely destitute, but it introduces an immense amount of unpredictability into the legal proceedings. Because the definition of what is equitable is left entirely to the discretion of a family law judge, it turns asset division into a high-stakes chess match requiring specialized forensic accounting, property appraisals, and extensive legal advocacy. The financial complexity escalates exponentially when dealing with modern asset classes that did not exist during the 20th century divorce boom. Family law attorneys and financial planners are now forced to untangle intricate webs of digital currency, stock options, restricted stock units, venture capital investments, and intellectual property rights. Determining the exact value of a cryptocurrency portfolio that fluctuates wildly on an hourly basis, or valuing a tech startup that has not yet gone public, introduces massive legal friction. If one spouse secretes away digital assets in unhosted crypto wallets, the other spouse must incur the significant expense of hiring digital forensic experts to trace blockchain transactions. The modern American asset portfolio is far more fluid and harder to quantify than the traditional combination of a suburban home, a family sedan, and a corporate pension plan, making the modern financial unwinding of a marriage a lengthy and highly technical operation. Furthermore, the long-term financial obligations of alimony or spousal support have undergone a major transformation in the public eye. Historically, permanent alimony was standard practice, designed to provide ongoing lifetime financial support to a former wife who had never entered the professional workforce. In the contemporary legal landscape, permanent alimony has been largely phased out across the United States in favor of rehabilitative or rehabilitative spousal support. This modern approach views spousal support as a temporary bridge designed to give the lower-earning spouse a defined period, typically a few years, to acquire the necessary education, training, or job skills to become financially self-sufficient. This shift reflects the reality of the modern American economy, where dual-income households are the norm and women make up a significant portion of the workforce. Yet, the negotiation of these support terms remains a primary battleground, where historical expectations clash violently with modern economic realities, leading to prolonged legal disputes that can drain a couple's life savings before a final decree is ever issued. While asset division and spousal support represent the tangible, financial dimensions of this structural transition, they are merely the prelude to the most emotionally charged and legally volatile aspect of the entire process: the battle over parental rights and the division of time with children. The way American courts and the public view child custody has shifted dramatically, moving from an era of default maternal preference to a highly contested paradigm of co-parenting. But as couples step into this arena, they often discover that the line between a healthy co-parenting arrangement and a toxic, drawn-out custody war is incredibly thin, governed by psychological variables and legal mechanisms that can completely reshape a child's future. What happens when the legal system attempts to quantify parental love into a calendar schedule? And what are the hidden psychological traps that await parents who enter this modern arena? To understand how the American view of child custody evolved into the modern co-parenting paradigm of 2026, we have to look back at a foundational doctrine that governed family courts for over a century: the tender years doctrine. Under this traditional legal framework, the judicial system operated on a powerful structural presumption that during a child's developmental years, typically from infancy up to age 4 or 5, the mother was inherently better suited to provide care, nurture, and moral guidance. Fathers were systematically relegated to the role of financial providers, expected to pay child support while receiving limited visitation rights, such as alternating weekends and a few hours on a weeknight. This legal default created a highly predictable, but incredibly rigid standard that left little room for the nuances of individual family dynamics. As the American workforce shifted and women increasingly built robust careers, the social fabric changed, and fathers began demanding an equal role in their children's daily lives. Over the last few decades, the tender years doctrine was systematically dismantled across the United States, replaced by a gender-neutral standard known as the best interests of the child. On paper, this is an enlightened, egalitarian approach. In practice, however, it transformed custody disputes from predictable legal routines into deeply invasive, highly contentious psychological evaluations. Because the best interest standard is inherently subjective, family court judges are forced to examine every microscopic aspect of a parent's life, including their emotional stability, their work schedule, their physical health, and the specific quality of their attachment to the child. To see how this operates in the modern era, imagine a scenario in 2026 involving two parents named David and Jessica. They are attempting to navigate the dissolution of their marriage while managing the lives of their two school-aged children. David works a corporate job with structured hours, while Jessica is an independent contractor with a fluid, unpredictable schedule. Under the modern best interest framework, a family court judge will not simply award custody to Jessica based on historical gender roles. Instead, the court may appoint a neutral third-party professional, such as a child custody evaluator or a guardian ad litem, to conduct a comprehensive investigation into David and Jessica's domestic lives. This process is incredibly thorough and invasive. The evaluator will conduct multiple interviews with David and Jessica, perform surprise home visits to inspect the living conditions of each parent's residence, interview the children's teachers and pediatricians, and administer standardized psychological testing, such as the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. Every interaction, text message, and social media post can be weaponized. If David sends an angry email out of frustration over a scheduling conflict, that document is submitted as evidence to argue that he lacks the emotional regulation necessary for primary physical custody. The immense pressure of this scrutiny often brings out the absolute worst in parents, escalating tension and driving up legal costs, as both sides attempt to build a case that they are the superior caregiver. This highly adversarial environment has led to a significant increase in the adoption of joint physical custody arrangements, which have become the standard expectation in many U.S. states. In theory, joint physical custody, such as a true 50-50 alternating week schedule, ensures that the child maintains a deep, ongoing relationship with both parents. However, implementing this model in the real world requires an extraordinary level of coordination and communication that many separating couples simply do not possess. Historical trends show that when a 50-50 schedule is forced upon a highly conflicted couple, the child is often caught in a perpetual state of transition, forced to pack up their life every 7 days and move between two households with completely different rules, parenting styles, and emotional atmospheres. Case studies from family law practitioners highlight the logistical nightmare this can create. If David and Jessica live in different school districts, a 50-50 split becomes geographically impossible once the children reach school age. One parent must be designated as the primary residential parent for schooling purposes, which immediately reignites the legal battle. Furthermore, joint custody requires continuous, direct communication regarding medical decisions, extracurricular activities, religious upbringing, and dietary choices. When parents use these daily logistical touchpoints as opportunities to continue old marital arguments, the child experiences a chronic state of stress known as a loyalty conflict, where they feel that loving one parent is a betrayal of the other. To mitigate this ongoing friction, the modern American legal system has increasingly turned to technological solutions, leading to the rise of court-mandated co-parenting applications. In 2026, it is common for a family court judge to order that all communication between separating parents must occur exclusively through specialized platforms like Our Family Wizard or Talking Parents. These applications are designed to strip the emotional hostility out of parental communication. Every text message, calendar update, and expense reimbursement request sent through these platforms is time-stamped, unalterable, and completely admissible in court. The apps feature built-in tone meters that flag aggressive or emotionally charged language before a message is sent, forcing parents to communicate in a professional, business-like manner. While these technological guardrails can help lower the temperature of daily interactions, they also underscore how transactional and detached the modern co-parenting journey has become. Parents are essentially interacting with each other through a digital buffer, treating the upbringing of their children like a corporate joint venture, rather than a shared human experience. This digitalization of family management is a direct response to the reality that traditional, face-to-face communication frequently breaks down under the weight of historical resentment. Beyond the logistical and emotional challenges of co-parenting lies a highly complex financial mechanism that ties directly into custody percentages, the calculation of child support. In the vast majority of U.S. jurisdictions, child support is calculated using a strict, state-mandated mathematical formula. This formula typically factors in the gross incomes of both parents, the cost of health insurance for the children, work-related childcare expenses, and, crucially, the exact number of overnight visits the children spend with each parent annually. Because the number of overnights directly influences the monthly dollar amount transferred from one parent to the other, time with children has essentially been monetized by the state. This creates a perverse incentive structure within custody negotiations. If David can secure a schedule that gives him 183 overnights per year instead of 150, his monthly child support obligation to Jessica may drop significantly. Consequently, custody battles that appear to be about parental love and bonding are often driven beneath the surface by hidden financial calculations. Parents find themselves fighting aggressively for an extra Tuesday night on the calendar, not because they are available to spend quality time with their child, but because that specific overnight alters the child support equation in their favor. This monetization of parenting time introduces a profound layer of cynicism into the process, turning the schedule into a financial battleground where children are used as leverage to protect income or maximize support payments, paving the way for deep generational impacts that sociologists are only beginning to fully comprehend as these children grow into adulthood. What are the long-term psychological consequences for children who grow up inside this highly transaction-oriented legal matrix, and how does it reshape their own views on love and commitment? To trace the generational echoes of this institutional shifting, we must examine the longitudinal data tracking the children of the late 20th century divorce boom, who are now navigating their own adult relationships in 2026. For decades, developmental psychologists have studied what is known as the intergenerational transmission of relationship instability. Studies indicate that individuals who experience the restructuring of their parental homes during childhood are statistically more likely to experience the dissolution of their own marriages later in life. This is not due to a genetic predisposition, but rather to the subtle, deeply ingrained psychological templates that children absorb during their formative years. When a child witnesses chronic parental conflict, systemic emotional withdrawal, or a highly transactional legal battle over custody and child support, their baseline blueprint for intimacy is fundamentally altered. Imagine a scenario in 2026 involving an individual named Ryan, whose parents underwent a highly contentious, litigated separation in the late 1990s. Throughout his childhood, Ryan watched his parents use court-mandated communication logs, argue over extra custody nights, and weaponize child support payments. As an adult entering a long-term partnership, Ryan may struggle with an underlying hypervigilance. At the first sign of routine marital conflict, his psychological defense mechanisms might interpret the disagreement not as a normal bump in the road, but as the first step toward inevitable structural collapse. This can lead to two distinct potential outcomes. Either an avoidant attachment style where Ryan prematurely exits relationships to protect himself from anticipated abandonment, or an anxious attachment style where he tolerates unhealthy relationship dynamics out of an intense fear of duplicating his parents' fate. Furthermore, this generational exposure has fueled a profound skepticism toward the traditional legal institution of marriage itself. Many adult children of the divorce boom view the traditional marriage license not as a romantic milestone, but as an unnecessary legal risk that grants the state immense power over one's future personal and financial autonomy. This mindset explains the massive cultural rise in cohabitation without marriage across the United States. Younger Americans are consciously choosing to build lives, purchase real estate, and raise children together while deliberately bypassing the formal legal contract. They believe that by avoiding the legal system entirely, they can insulate themselves from the weaponized logistics and financial devastation they witnessed during their youth. Yet, as family law experts frequently point out, cohabitating couples who separate without a marriage license often face a chaotic, unregulated legal gray area regarding property rights, underscoring that avoiding the contract does not entirely eliminate the complexities of a relationship breakdown. This brings us to a major shift in how the contemporary American legal system and the public attempt to mitigate these generational traumas. The widespread adoption of alternative dispute resolution mechanisms, most notably mediation and collaborative practice. Throughout the late 20th century, the default method for ending a marriage was litigation. A couple would retain separate adversarial attorneys, file public lawsuits against one another, and engage in a costly discovery process that culminated in a formal trial before a family court judge. In 2026, the public perception of this adversarial model has grown increasingly negative. Litigation is now widely viewed as an inefficient, economically draining process that exacerbates trauma and destroys any remaining chance of a functional post-relationship friendship. Instead, the modern American viewpoint heavily favors mediation as the preferred path. In a mediated framework, the couple retains a single neutral third-party mediator whose sole objective is to help them negotiate a mutually acceptable settlement agreement outside of the courtroom. The mediator does not represent either party and cannot provide individual legal advice. Instead, they facilitate communication, clarify legal realities, and help the couple find creative compromises regarding asset division and parenting schedules. Case studies comparing litigated separations to mediated ones consistently demonstrate that mediation results in significantly lower overall costs, faster resolutions, and higher rates of long-term compliance with the final agreement. Because the couple actively participates in crafting their own future, they are far more likely to respect the terms of the settlement than if an arbitrary schedule was handed down to them by a judge. To understand the step-by-step reality of this modern approach, imagine a couple named Amanda and Robert who decide to utilize collaborative family law in 2026 to dismantle their 15-year marriage. In a collaborative framework, Amanda and Robert each hire their own specialized collaborative attorney, but all parties sign a formal participation agreement. This contract stipulates a binding rule. If the case cannot be settled out of court and advances to litigation, both collaborative attorneys must immediately withdraw, and the couple must hire entirely new litigation lawyers from scratch. This mechanism completely removes the financial incentive for the attorneys to escalate conflict or prolong the dispute, as they cannot profit from a future courtroom battle. The collaborative process operates through a series of structured, multidisciplinary meetings. Rather than relying solely on lawyers, Amanda and Robert build a professional support team tailored to their specific needs. This team typically includes a neutral financial professional, such as a certified divorce financial analyst, who compiles all asset data, analyzes tax implications, and projects the long-term financial viability of various settlement options. The team also includes a neutral child specialist or family coach, who helps the parents design a developmentally appropriate co-parenting plan without exposing the children to legal scrutiny. Step by step, the group works through a series of joint four-way meetings. In the initial sessions, they establish ground rules, identify the core values and priorities of both parties, and ensure complete, voluntary financial disclosure. In subsequent meetings, the financial neutral presents various scenarios for dividing the marital estate, while the family coach helps iron out scheduling logistics. Once a comprehensive agreement is reached, the attorneys draft a formal marital settlement agreement and submit it to the court for routine administrative approval, bypassing the courtroom entirely. This collaborative model reflects a profound cultural evolution. The realization that a relationship breakdown is primarily an emotional and financial transition, and only secondarily a legal event. By surrounding the family with supportive professionals rather than adversarial combatants, the modern system attempts to preserve the psychological well-being of the entire family unit. Yet, even with these advanced alternative frameworks, the process of parting ways remains an intensely personal and often isolating psychological journey. Society has spent decades developing rituals to support couples as they enter a marriage, from bridal showers to elaborate wedding ceremonies, but has historically offered nothing but silence, shame, and isolation when that contract ends. But a new cultural movement is gaining massive traction across the United States, aiming to completely redefine the emotional conclusion of a relationship. It is a concept that challenges our deepest societal assumptions about success and failure, forcing us to ask, can the end of a love story be handled with the exact same level of intentionality, respect, and celebration as its beginning? Or are we simply masking the inherent pain of a broken bond with trendy psychological terminology? To explore this emerging cultural landscape, we have to look closely at a term that permanently altered the American lexicon in 2014, conscious uncoupling. When a high-profile Hollywood actress utilized this specific phrase to describe the end of her high-profile marriage, the public initially reacted with intense cynicism and mockery. Late-night television hosts ridiculed the term as pretentious, elitist jargon designed to avoid the harsh, messy reality of a standard legal breakup. However, over the past decade leading up to 2026, a remarkable transformation has occurred. What began as a widely mocked celebrity trend has quietly evolved into a highly respected psychological framework, adopted by millions of everyday Americans seeking an alternative to the traditional narrative of bitter warfare and lifelong resentment. At its core, conscious uncoupling is a structured emotional and psychological methodology that completely rejects the societal concept of a broken home. Instead of viewing the conclusion of a marriage as a tragic failure, this paradigm frames it as a successful completion of a specific chapter in life. It posits that a relationship can be profoundly meaningful and successful for a defined period, and that choosing to end the legal contract does not invalidate the love, growth, and shared history that occurred during the union. The step-by-step process of this framework requires an immense amount of emotional maturity and self-reflection, forcing both individuals to look inward rather than assigning external blame. Imagine a scenario in 2026 involving a couple named Christopher and Michelle. They have been married for 12 years, share a home in the suburbs, and have 2 children. Over time, they have drifted apart romantically and intellectually, realizing that their long-term personal goals are no longer aligned. Instead of allowing their relationship to deteriorate into chronic passive aggression or infidelity, Christopher and Michelle make a conscious decision to undergo a structured uncoupling process. The journey begins with a commitment to complete emotional accountability. Under the guidance of a specialized relationship coach, Christopher and Michelle are required to step away from the victim-perpetrator dynamic. Instead of compiling a list of each other's flaws and historical mistakes, each person must deeply analyze their own role in the breakdown of the relationship. Michelle might explore how her tendency to prioritize her career led to emotional withdrawal, while Christopher examines how his avoidant communication style created a wall of silence within the home. The second critical step in this modern psychological journey involves reclaiming individual power and breaking the trauma bond. In a traditional adversarial breakup, individuals often obsess over what their former partner is doing, who they are seeing, and how they are spending money, trapping themselves in a loop of perpetual anger. The conscious uncoupling framework forces Christopher and Michelle to intentionally sever these emotional, energetic ties. They participate in structured exercises designed to help them release their grievances, process their grief in a healthy environment, and redirect their focus entirely onto their own individual healing and future personal growth. This step is vital for preventing the lingering bitterness that so often poisons future relationships and complicates post-marital co-parenting. Once emotional clarity is achieved, the couple moves to the third step, delivering themselves from the cultural scripts of shame and failure. Christopher and Michelle must actively work to reframe how they present their separation to their extended family, friends, and community. Instead of making a dramatic, sorrowful announcement that invites pity and gossip, they craft a unified narrative. They communicate clearly to their social circle that they are making a healthy, deliberate choice to transition their relationship from a romantic partnership into a collaborative co-parenting alliance. This proactive approach insulates the family unit from external judgment and creates a protective psychological buffer for their children, who see their parents navigating a major life transition with dignity and mutual respect. The final and perhaps most controversial step of this modern movement involves the creation of formal transition rituals, including the rise of the divorce ceremony or separation celebration. In 2026, it is no longer an anomaly for Americans to host intentional gatherings to mark the formal end of a marriage. Imagine if Christopher and Michelle, upon receiving their final legal decree, decide to host a small private dinner with their closest mutual friends. During this gathering, they do not express anger or celebration over being rid of one another. Instead, they publicly thank each other for the years of companionship, express gratitude for the children they created together, and formally release each other from their marital vows. To many traditionalists, this concept seems deeply unnatural, even pathological. Critics argue that celebrating or formalizing the breakdown of a family unit trivializes the sacred nature of marriage and masks the deep, inherent trauma of a broken bond with trendy, superficial psychological terminology. They point out that no matter how amicable a couple attempts to be, the reality of splitting a household, altering financial trajectories, and disrupting a child's daily stability is a profoundly painful experience that cannot be fully sanitized by a carefully curated ceremony. There is a valid concern that the cultural pressure to achieve a perfect, peaceful uncoupling can create a secondary layer of shame for individuals who find themselves feeling deeply angry, devastated, or unable to find immediate closure. Yet, proponents of these modern rituals argue that they serve a vital anthropological purpose that the contemporary legal system completely ignores. Human beings rely on rituals to process major status transitions, such as births, graduations, weddings, and funerals. By creating a structured, respectful space to mark the end of a relationship, Americans are attempting to fill a cultural void, providing an alternative to the isolating clinical reality of receiving a cold legal document in the mail. This psychological evolution reflects a broader societal recognition that the emotional contract of a marriage requires just as much closure and intentionality as the legal contract. As these modern psychological frameworks and alternative legal processes continue to reshape the domestic landscape, they are also laying the groundwork for an entirely new demographic phenomenon that is exploding across the United States. While much of the historical data focuses on the relationship breakdowns of young couples with small children, a massive, unprecedented wave of separations is occurring at the exact opposite end of the age spectrum. Older Americans who spent decades building wealth, raising families, and maintaining the appearance of institutional stability are suddenly walking away from their long-term marriages in record numbers. This distinct demographic shift is fundamentally changing the economics of retirement, restructuring adult family dynamics, and forcing a complete re-examination of what it means to grow old in America. What are the unique societal forces driving this late-life marital revolution? And what happens when the legal system is forced to untangle a lifetime of joint assets just as the clock is running out? This unprecedented demographic wave is widely known as silver divorce or gray divorce, a phenomenon that has seen the rate of relationship dissolution among Americans over the age of 50 double since the 1990s, even as rates among younger generations have steadily declined. To comprehend the unique societal forces driving this late-life marital revolution in 2026, we have to look at the intersection of increased human longevity, the shifting cultural expectations of the baby boomer generation, and the economic realities of modern aging. Historically, if a couple reached their mid-50s or 60s and found themselves in an unhappy or stagnant marriage, the prevailing cultural consensus was to simply tough it out. Society expected older individuals to tolerate marital dissatisfaction for the remaining years of their lives, prioritizing the preservation of a long-standing family unit above individual emotional fulfillment. However, the modern American perspective on aging has changed dramatically. With advancements in healthcare and increased awareness of wellness, an individual turning 60 in 2026 can reasonably expect to live another 20 or 30 active, healthy years. This extension of the human lifespan has fundamentally altered the psychological calculus of late-life marriage. Instead of viewing 60 as the beginning of the end, older Americans increasingly view it as a major developmental threshold, a third act of life that presents a final opportunity for personal reinvention and self-actualization. When the nest empties and the distractions of active parenting fade away, many couples find themselves looking across the dinner table at a partner with whom they no longer share a meaningful intellectual or emotional connection. The prospect of spending another quarter century in a cold, distant partnership becomes untenable, leading to a deliberate choice to seek a fresh start. To examine how this plays out through a step-by-step case study, imagine a scenario in 2026 involving a couple named Thomas and Susan. They are 64 years old, have been married for 38 years, raised 3 adult children, and are on the verge of retirement. Over the last decade, their relationship has devolved into a routine of cohabitation without intimacy. Once their youngest child graduated from college and established an independent life, Thomas and Susan were forced to confront the void that remained when the shared project of parenting was complete. Susan, observing historical trends of independent women thriving in their later years, realizes that she wants to spend her remaining decades traveling, pursuing new educational interests, and living in an urban environment. Thomas, conversely, envisions a quiet retirement dedicated to gardening and solitary hobbies in their suburban home. Under the traditional cultural framework, Susan might have suppressed her desires, choosing resentment over the social disruption of a late-life split. In the modern era, however, Susan initiates a formal separation. But as Thomas and Susan step into the legal and financial reality of a gray divorce, they quickly discover that untangling a lifetime of joint assets just as the clock is running out introduces an extraordinary level of complexity and risk that younger couples rarely face. The primary financial challenge of late-life relationship dissolution is that there is no time left to recover from economic mistakes or market downturns. When a 25-year-old couple divides their modest assets, they have decades of peak earning years ahead of them to rebuild their retirement accounts and accumulate wealth. When Thomas and Susan split their estate at 64, their earning capacity is transitioning to a fixed income, meaning that any loss of capital is permanent. The step-by-step financial untangling of a long-term marriage requires a meticulous analysis of complex asset classes, beginning with corporate pensions and retirement accounts, such as 401ks and traditional IRAs. In the United States, dividing these accounts without triggering catastrophic tax penalties or early withdrawal fees requires a highly specialized legal instrument known as a Qualified Domestic Relations Order, or QDRO. A QDRO is a specific decree issued by a family court judge that instructs the administrator of a corporate retirement plan to split the account balance between the employee and their former spouse. If Thomas has accumulated $1 million in a corporate 401k plan over his 38-year career, the QDRO allows the plan administrator to transfer $500,000 directly into a separate retirement account in Susan's name. This transfer is executed as a tax-free rollover, preserving the tax-deferred status of the funds until Susan begins making withdrawals in retirement. However, if the QDRO is drafted incorrectly, or if the couple attempts to divide the funds through a standard cash withdrawal, the Internal Revenue Service will treat the transaction as a taxable distribution, instantly wiping out a massive percentage of the hard-earned savings through state and federal income taxes. The complexity intensifies when evaluating Social Security benefits, which represent a vital component of retirement security for millions of older Americans. Under United States federal law, a divorced individual is entitled to claim Social Security benefits based on their former spouse's earnings record rather than their own, provided the marriage lasted for at least 10 consecutive years and the individual remains unmarried. For Susan, who may have spent years out of the workforce raising their children, this policy is an essential financial lifeline. She can claim a spousal benefit worth up to 50% of Thomas's full retirement age benefit, without reducing the amount that Thomas himself receives. Navigating these federal regulations requires precise timing and coordination with the Social Security Administration, as claiming benefits too early can permanently reduce the monthly payout, complicating the delicate balance of postmarital economic survival. Furthermore, the division of the marital home presents a profound emotional and financial dilemma in a gray divorce. For Thomas and Susan, the suburban family residence represents both a massive concentration of their net worth and a repository of decades of familial memories. Susan may possess a deep emotional attachment to the house, desiring to buy out Thomas's share and remain in the property. However, a certified divorce financial analyst analyzing their situation would advise caution. Remaining in a large aging suburban home requires substantial ongoing cash flow for property taxes, homeowners insurance, utility bills, and structural maintenance. If Susan sacrifices a significant portion of her liquid retirement funds to buy out Thomas's interest in the real estate, she risks becoming house-rich and cash-poor, left with a valuable property but insufficient liquid capital to generate a stable monthly income during retirement. Consequently, historical trends show that the most economically viable outcome for many older couples is to sell the marital home, pay off any remaining mortgage debt, and split the liquid proceeds equally, forcing both individuals to downsize into smaller, more manageable living arrangements. This structural downsizing represents a profound lifestyle disruption, fracturing long-standing neighborhood social networks just as individuals are entering a stage of life where community support is most critical. The psychological impact of leaving the family home, combined with the reality of living alone on a halved budget, can plunge older adults into deep isolation, highlighting that the modern pursuit of late-life autonomy comes with significant, non-monetary costs. As this silver revolution continues to unfold across the United States, it is forcing family law attorneys, financial planners, and sociologists to completely rewrite the blueprint for aging. But while older Americans are busy dismantling long-standing institutions to seek individual fulfillment, an entirely different kind of revolution is happening simultaneously at the opposite end of the spectrum. The very nature of how Americans meet, connect, and document their relationships before a single vow is ever uttered is undergoing a massive digital and legal transformation. In a world dominated by algorithms, digital assets, and shifting legal definitions, the ultimate battleground for the future of American relationships is no longer found in the courtroom at the end of a marriage, but at the negotiating table before the union even begins. What happens when a generation raised on data and risk management attempts to legally insulate themselves from the emotional volatility of love, and how are modern contracts reshaping the very definition of romance? To understand how a generation raised on data and risk management is reshaping the very definition of romance, we have to look at the explosive rise and total cultural rebranding of the prenuptial agreement in 2026. Historically, the prenuptial agreement, or prenup, was viewed by the American public with deep cynicism, suspicion, and distaste. It was widely perceived as a cold, calculating instrument reserved exclusively for the ultra-wealthy, old money dynasties, or paranoid celebrities looking to shield their massive fortunes from a future predatory spouse. For an ordinary middle-class couple to bring up a prenup during the engagement period was often considered a romantic death sentence, a clear indication of a lack of trust that signaled the marriage was expected to fail before the wedding invitations were even mailed. In the modern landscape, that toxic stigma has been thoroughly dismantled. Driven by millennials and Generation Z, who witnessed the messy, litigated separations of their parents, the prenuptial agreement is now viewed as an essential component of mature relationship planning and emotional transparency. Younger Americans do not see a prenup as a lack of trust. They see it as an act of profound respect and financial literacy. They realize that when you get married in the United States, you are automatically entering into a default legal and financial contract written by the legislature of your specific state. If you do not write your own rules, the state will write them for you. And those default laws may not align with your personal values or economic realities. By proactively negotiating a prenup, couples are simply taking control of their own legal destiny, substituting the generic laws of the state with a customized framework that fits their unique partnership. To see how this operates step by step in 2026, imagine a scenario involving an engaged couple named John and Ashley. Both are 32 years old, college-educated, and established in their respective careers. John is a software engineer who has accumulated a modest portfolio of equity options in a growing tech startup, while Ashley is a marketing director who owns a townhome she purchased independently prior to meeting John. In a previous generation, John and Ashley would have married without a second thought regarding the legal commingling of these assets. In 2026, however, they view their upcoming union through the lens of modern risk management. They choose to retain separate legal counsel to draft a comprehensive prenuptial agreement that clearly defines separate property versus marital property. The step-by-step negotiation of a modern prenup requires absolute, unvarnished financial disclosure. John must present a verified ledger of all his bank accounts, investment portfolios, debt obligations, and the current valuation of his tech company stock options. Ashley must do the same, including an independent property appraisal of her townhome. If either party intentionally secretes away an asset or understates their net worth during this process, historical trends show that a family court judge can completely invalidate the entire prenuptial agreement down the road, treating the lack of disclosure as a fraudulent inducement. Once full disclosure is complete, their respective attorneys negotiate specific clauses tailored to their lifestyle. They agree that the appreciation and value of Ashley's townhome during the marriage will remain her exclusive separate property, and that John's tech options will be insulated from future division. This meticulous mapping of assets provides a profound sense of psychological security, removing financial anxiety from the relationship and allowing the couple to focus entirely on building their emotional bond. Beyond traditional assets like real estate and stock portfolios, the modern prenuptial agreement has evolved to include highly specific, contemporary provisions that reflect the realities of a digitally connected society. One of the fastest-growing trends in 2026 family law is the integration of social media clauses and lifestyle clauses into prenuptial contracts. These modern provisions are designed to protect an individual's digital footprint, professional reputation, and personal dignity in the event of a future relationship breakdown. A standard social media clause might strictly prohibit either party from posting defamatory, embarrassing, or intimate photographs, videos, or text messages about the other spouse on any public platform, including Instagram, TikTok, or future digital mediums. The clause often includes a predetermined financial penalty or liquidated damages for every single violation, creating a powerful economic disincentive for post-relationship public smear campaigns. To understand the mechanics of these lifestyle clauses, imagine if John and Ashley include an infidelity clause or a behavioral clause in their agreement. If independent evidence such as digital communication logs or forensic tracking establishes that one party engaged in an extramarital affair, the clause can dictate a specific, non-punitive modification of the property division or spousal support terms within the bounds of state law. While family court judges traditionally ignore fault in standard divorce proceedings due to no-fault legislation, a validly executed prenuptial contract can allow couples to voluntarily reintroduce behavioral accountability into their private legal framework. Furthermore, modern prenups frequently address the custody and financial support of family pets, utilizing petnuptial clauses to determine who retains ownership of a shared animal, thereby preventing expensive, emotionally draining custody battles over a family dog or cat. However, the pursuit of legal insulation does not stop at the altar. For couples who married without a prenuptial agreement but later experience a profound shift in their financial or personal circumstances, the legal system has adapted to offer an alternative mechanism: the postnuptial agreement. A postnuptial agreement operates under the exact same legal principles as a prenup, but it is executed after the marriage has already commenced. Imagine a scenario where 5 years into the marriage, John's tech startup undergoes a massive public offering, instantly transforming his illiquid stock options into multi-million-dollar liquid assets. The sudden influx of wealth introduces a new layer of complexity to the marital dynamic. To address this, John and Ashley can voluntarily enter into a postnuptial agreement to clearly delineate how this new capital will be managed, protected, and potentially divided in the future. The execution of a postnuptial agreement is subjected to an even higher level of judicial scrutiny than a prenuptial contract. Because a married couple already owes a fiduciary duty to one another, family court judges closely examine postnups to ensure that neither party was coerced, threatened, or manipulated into signing away their inherent legal rights under duress. Both spouses must have independent legal representation, and the agreement must be fundamentally fair at the time of execution and at the time of enforcement. Despite this intense legal scrutiny, the utilization of postnuptial agreements has seen a significant upward trajectory across the United States. Couples are using these postmarital contracts as a tool to navigate unexpected career changes, significant inheritances, or to reestablish emotional trust after a period of marital instability, demonstrating a profound cultural shift toward treating marriage as a dynamic, constantly evolving legal partnership that requires active, ongoing maintenance. As the American public increasingly embraces this hyper-rational, contract-driven approach to love and intimacy, the traditional romanticized view of the marital journey is being replaced by a highly calculated model of domestic cooperation. But this systemic reliance on legal guardrails and risk mitigation raises a profound philosophical question for the future of American society. By spent so much energy preparing for the potential end of a relationship before it even begins, are modern couples inadvertently weakening the very fabric of long-term commitment? Or are they creating a more stable, honest foundation that will ultimately drive down relationship failures in the decades to come? As we look closer at how these legal innovations intersect with the raw, unpredictable reality of human emotion, we begin to see the emergence of a bizarre new psychological landscape, where the line between a romantic partnership and a corporate merger is completely erased, setting the stage for an unprecedented conflict that will define the next generation of American families. What happens when the ultimate safety net becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, And how is the ultimate decline of traditional marriage transforming the social fabric of the entire nation? To evaluate how this hyper-rational approach to partnership alters the macro-level social fabric of the United States in 2026, we must confront a stark sociological reality. The structural decline of marriage is no longer a slow, distant projection, but an active realignment of American living patterns. For generations, the nuclear family household, anchored by a legally married couple, served as the fundamental economic and social building block of the nation. It was the primary vehicle through which communities organized real estate development, local tax bases, school funding, healthcare delivery, and elder care networks. Today, historical trends reveal a dramatic inversion of this structure. As Americans increasingly delay, bypass, or exit formal marriage contracts, the single-person household and the unmarried cohabitating household have transitioned from marginal lifestyle choices into the dominant demographic forces of modern society. This macro-level transformation has triggered a cascade of systemic adjustments across the American economy, beginning with the real estate sector. Imagine a scenario in 2026 involving a public housing and urban development specialist named Linda. In her analysis of major metropolitan areas, Linda observes that the demand for expansive, multi-bedroom suburban family homes has experienced a notable stabilization, while the demand for high-density, single-occupancy urban apartments and accessory dwelling units has surged exponentially. Property developers are adapting their entire construction strategies to accommodate this shifting market, building complex micro-apartments and co-living spaces designed for individuals navigating life independently. This shift in infrastructure fundamentally alters the physical layout of American cities, reducing the focus on traditional family-centric amenities like cul-de-sacs and large neighborhood schools, and replacing them with infrastructure tailored to a more transient, unattached workforce. The economic implications of this demographic pivot ripple directly into the consumer goods and utility industries. Dual income, married households historically benefited from profound economies of scale, purchasing goods in bulk, sharing subscription services, and consolidating insurance policies. When a household fractures or fails to form, those economies of scale vanish instantly. Two separate households require two independent utility connections, two sets of major appliances, and two distinct streams of grocery consumption. This fragmentation creates a unique economic phenomenon where, despite a decline in population growth rates, the absolute number of independent households continues to rise, driving up the aggregate demand for housing units and basic infrastructure. While this trend provides a continuous stimulus for certain consumer-driven sectors of the economy, it simultaneously places immense pressure on municipal resources and drives up the baseline cost of living for individual citizens, who must bear the full financial burden of survival without a partner to share the load. Furthermore, the erosion of the traditional family structure is forcing a massive re-examination of the corporate benefit and healthcare delivery systems in the United States. For nearly a century, the American employment model was structured around the assumption of a male breadwinner, whose corporate health insurance plan covered a dependent spouse and multiple children. In 2026, human resource departments are being forced to completely overhaul their compensation packages to stay relevant. Unmarried individuals and single parents require a vastly different matrix of support, including portable wellness accounts, subsidized single-parent childcare stipends, and flexible family leave policies that extend beyond the traditional definition of immediate family. The legal and financial definitions of dependency are being pushed to their absolute limits as individuals seek to extend domestic benefits to cohabitating partners, platonic co-parents, or extended family members who provide the daily support network traditionally offered by a spouse. This brings us to the profound crisis of long-term care and systemic elder care confronting the nation. As the massive wave of silver divorce intersect with a rising population of lifelong single individuals, millions of Americans are entering their twilight years without a legal partner or a traditional nuclear family network to manage their health crises. Historically, informal spousal caregiving served as the primary line of defense against the disabling conditions of old age, keeping elderly individuals out of institutionalized nursing facilities for as long as possible. Without a spouse to monitor medication adherence, coordinate medical appointments, and provide basic mobility assistance, the burden of care falls squarely onto adult children or the public social safety net. Case studies from public health organizations illustrate the immense structural strain this creates. Adult children, who are already balancing demanding careers and managing their own children, are forced to split their time and financial resources between two completely separate, aging parental households that cannot cooperate due to decades of historical animosity. The economic cost of this fragmentation is astronomical, leading to lost productivity in the workplace, increased rates of caregiver burnout, and a dramatic acceleration in the depletion of private family wealth as older adults are forced to rely on expensive, private home health agencies or state-funded Medicaid facilities much earlier in their aging cycle. This reality exposes the hidden social paradox of the modern pursuit of autonomy. While ending an unfulfilling marriage can provide a profound release from immediate emotional distress, it often transfers the systemic costs of that choice onto the next generation and the public infrastructure down the line. Yet, amidst this landscape of institutional fragmentation, the American public is not simply surrendering to isolation. Instead, they are actively constructing entirely new, alternative frameworks for domestic cooperation and legal protection. One of the most significant legal and cultural innovations emerging in 2026 is the rise of platonic co-parenting agreements and intentional community contracts. Individuals who desire to raise children or build long-term domestic stability, but who remain profoundly skeptical of romantic marriage, are entering into binding legal partnerships with close friends, siblings, or trusted peers. These contracts utilize elements of traditional corporate governance, estate planning, and family law to clearly delineate financial responsibilities, inheritance paths, and child-rearing duties, treating the arrangement as a purposeful, non-romantic civic project. Step by step, these platonic partners work with progressive family law practitioners to draft comprehensive domestic operating agreements. They establish joint bank accounts specifically earmarked for household operations and childcare, outline detailed exit strategies in the event that one partner needs to relocate for a career opportunity, and create mediation frameworks to resolve internal disputes without entering a courtroom. This structural shifting demonstrates that the desire for family, community, and mutual support remains a fundamental human drive, even as the traditional romance-driven framework of the nuclear marriage license loses its absolute monopoly on the American imagination. The public is essentially separating the concept of family from the concept of romantic love, creating a highly pragmatic, modular approach to building a life. As these legal and cultural adjustments continue to mature across the United States, they are fundamentally redefining what it means to be a successful citizen in a modern society. The traditional milestones of the American dream, a lifelong marriage, a suburban home, and a predictable multi-generational family tree, are being systematically replaced by a fluid, adaptive model of relationship management that prioritizes flexibility, risk mitigation, and individual well-being above institutional permanence. But as this contract-driven, hyper-rational era takes firm hold of our private lives, it forces us to gaze directly into the future and ask, what does the ultimate destination of this evolutionary trajectory look like for the next generation of children who have never seen a traditional lifelong marital union? And how will these systemic changes reshape the very concept of human intimacy in the centuries to come? The line between the public legal system and our deepest private desires has been permanently blurred, setting the stage for a final radical transformation of human society. To forecast the psychological baseline of the next generation, we must analyze the emerging data surrounding children raised entirely within this highly transactional, post-nuclear matrix. In 2026, the first cohort of children whose parents universally utilize court-mandated co-parenting applications, automated child support algorithms, and strictly structured 50-50 custody schedules are entering early adulthood. Sociological research tracking these young adults indicates a profound and unprecedented evolution in how they conceptualize human intimacy. Unlike the children of the late 20th century boom, who often experience the sudden, chaotic shattering of an idealized nuclear home, this modern generation grew up with relationship fluidity as their baseline reality. They never possessed the illusion of marital permanence, meaning their psychological adaptation is rooted not in trauma or shock, but in a deeply systemic, almost clinical pragmatism. Imagine a scenario in 2026 involving a 22-year-old university student named Chloe. Throughout her entire childhood, Chloe's life was governed by a digital calendar. Every alternating Monday, her father and mother exchanged her in a neutral public location, their interactions limited to polite, business-like pleasantries. Every financial request, from piano lessons to orthodontic work, was uploaded into a software application, reviewed by a forensic algorithm, and split down to the exact percentage point mandated by state guidelines. For Chloe, love, parental responsibility, and domestic stability were always quantifiable, legally managed variables. As she enters the dating arena in 2026, Chloe does not seek the grand, sweeping fairy tale narratives of the past. Instead, she approaches potential partners with the mindset of an actuary. She views relationships through the lens of contract management, risk mitigation, and emotional sustainability. This hyper-rationality manifests in a profound shift in early-stage relationship dynamics. Case studies from campus counseling centers and youth demographic surveys show that young Americans are increasingly demanding explicit, written transparency from their partners long before any formal commitment is made. It is common for dating couples in their early 20s to engage in structured conversations regarding their credit scores, mental health histories, attachment styles, and long-term career trajectories before even defining their relationship as exclusive. They are essentially applying the principles of prenuptial negotiations to the casual dating phase, attempting to insulate themselves from emotional volatility by conducting exhaustive due diligence upfront. While this approach minimizes the likelihood of sudden, explosive heartbreaks, critics point out that it also risks stripping relationships of their organic spontaneity, vulnerability, and romance, transforming the pursuit of love into a calculated screening process. Furthermore, this generational pragmatism has accelerated a massive legal and corporate counter-movement aimed at commercializing this risk-averse mindset. In 2026, the legal technology sector has capitalized on the public's desire for relationship insulation by introducing relationship management software and automated domestic contracts tailored for unmarried couples. Imagine if two young professionals named Kevin and Rachel decide to cohabitate in a major metropolitan city. Rather than relying on vague verbal agreements regarding how they will split the rent, utilities, and grocery bills, they download a specialized legal application that drafts a binding cohabitation agreement in less than 10 minutes. The application utilizes artificial intelligence to scan state-specific property laws, public records, and financial guidelines, creating a customized contract that dictates exactly how their shared assets, lease obligations, and even future joint pets will be distributed if the relationship terminates. This digitalization of relationship contracts treats domestic partnerships like short-term corporate joint ventures. It reflects a profound cultural acceptance of impermanence. The contract is not signed with the expectation of lifetime endurance, but with the explicit recognition that the relationship is a fluid arrangement that could naturally conclude when it no longer serves the personal growth of either individual. The legal system, once viewed as a catastrophic emergency room for failed marriages, has been integrated into the daily routine maintenance of casual, unmarried domestic life. This widespread sanitization and contractualization of intimacy has also triggered a fascinating sociological backlash: the rise of the radical relationship traditionalism movement among a distinct segment of the American public. In 2026, a visible counterculture has emerged on digital platforms, explicitly rejecting the hyper-rational, modular, and uncoupled lifestyle of the modern mainstream. This movement, often championed by young couples, advocates for a return to rigid, highly structured, institutional models of marriage, including traditional gender roles, early family formation, and the explicit rejection of prenuptial agreements or alternative dispute frameworks. They argue that by constantly preparing for the potential end of a marriage, modern society has created a self-fulfilling prophecy, ensuring that relationships fail because individuals never truly burn their ships or commit unconditionally. To understand this perspective, consider a case study of a young couple who chooses to marry under a covenant marriage framework, a legally binding option available in states like Louisiana, Arizona, and Arkansas. A covenant marriage requires couples to undergo extensive premarital counseling, voluntarily sign a declaration intent to remain together for life, and explicitly waive their right to a standard no-fault legal separation. Under a covenant contract, the parties can only seek a legal dissolution under extremely narrow, fault-based criteria, such as a multi-year physical abandonment or a felony imprisonment, effectively trapping themselves within the institutional bond by choice. This radical traditionalist movement highlights a profound undercurrent of anxiety running through contemporary American society. As the traditional structures of family, community, and institutional stability continue to dissolve into a sea of fluid contracts and digital buffers, a segment of the population feels deeply unmoored. They are willing to sacrifice a significant degree of individual autonomy and legal flexibility in exchange for the profound psychological security of an absolute, unbreakable structural bond. This cultural schism between the hyper-flexible, contract-driven mainstream and the hyper-rigid traditionalist counterculture is creating a fractured social landscape where the very definition of what constitutes a successful, moral, and stable life is fiercely contested. As these two diametrically opposed ideologies clash in the cultural arena, they are setting the stage for the ultimate transformation of American society. The evolution of the divorce journey has come full circle. It began as a rare, deeply shameful moral failure, transitioned into a massive legal and socio-economic liberation movement, evolved into a hyper-rationalized financial and digital industry, and has now fractured into a fundamental debate over the future of human connection itself. We are left standing at the edge of an entirely new era, where the traditional pillars of American civilization are being replaced by dynamic algorithms and customizable contracts. How will this ultimate ideological conflict resolve itself as we enter the next decade? And what is the final undeniable truth about the modern American love story that no legal document, digital application, or sociological statistic can ever fully capture? To answer that definitive question, we must look beyond the sterile machinery of the family court system, the mathematical coldness of asset division spreadsheets, and the digital logs of co-parenting software. The ultimate, undeniable truth about the modern American love story in 2026 is that the structural evolution of divorce has not destroyed the desire for human connection. Rather, it has elevated the high stakes of vulnerability to an unprecedented level. For over a century, the legal and social architecture of the United States treated marriage as a permanent cage, a socioeconomic contract that individuals were forced to endure regardless of the emotional or psychological cost. Today, the modern American viewpoint has completely inverted this paradigm, transforming marriage into a voluntary laboratory of personal alignment, where longevity is no longer accepted as the sole metric of relationship success. This profound cultural shift means that the true complexity of the modern relationship journey lies in the paradox of total freedom. When society strips away the legal barriers, the moral stigmas, and the economic dependencies that once forced couples to stay together, the decision to remain in a long-term partnership becomes an active, daily choice rather than a passive institutional default. This realization has fundamentally altered the psychological environment of American households. It introduces a continuous, subtle tension into modern partnerships, requiring an ongoing, deliberate effort to maintain intellectual compatibility, emotional safety, and shared purpose. In this fluid environment, a relationship breakdown is no longer viewed simply as a sudden, catastrophic event caused by an external shock or a singular act of betrayal. Instead, it is understood as a slow, cumulative process of emotional drifting, a gradual divergence of two individual life paths that the legal system merely documents after the fact. To fully comprehend the step-by-step reality of this modern landscape, imagine a final scenario in 2026 involving an ordinary citizen named Marcus. Marcus is 45 years old, navigating the aftermath of a highly organized, mediated uncoupling from his partner of 15 years. His assets have been divided according to precise, equitable distribution models, his parenting time is governed by an automated digital calendar, and his communication with his former spouse is strictly managed through encrypted consumer platforms. On paper, Marcus has achieved the ideal modernized dissolution, a low-conflict, risk-mitigated, and structurally clean transition. Yet, as he sits alone in his newly acquired urban apartment, Marcus is forced to confront the raw, non-linear reality of human grief that no legal framework can ever fully sanitize or predict. The psychological journey of moving past a long-term union does not follow a clean, algorithmic trajectory. It operates in erratic, unpredictable waves. Marcus may experience a profound sense of liberation and personal autonomy on a Tuesday afternoon, only to be hit by a crushing wave of isolation and existential disorientation on a Thursday morning, when he realizes his children are spending the night at their mother's residence, according to the mandated calendar schedule. This emotional friction highlights the primary limitation of the modern contract-driven approach to love. While society has successfully developed sophisticated legal, financial, and technological tools to streamline the practical logistics of separation, it has yet to discover a method to accelerate the organic, messy process of human emotional healing. The deep, systemic pain of a fractured attachment bond remains completely immune to digital optimization. This persistent human variable is precisely why the future of American relationship dynamics is moving toward an era of unprecedented experimentation and structural customization. As the public recognizes that neither the hyper-rigid models of traditional institutional marriage nor the hyper-isolated realities of lifelong independence provide a perfect solution to the complexities of human intimacy, individuals are crafting highly unique, hybrid models of domestic life. We are witnessing the emergence of long-term partnerships defined by separate living arrangements, where couples remain deeply committed romantically and legally, but maintain independent households to preserve personal autonomy and protect individual financial estates from potential future disruptions. We are seeing the rise of multi-generational co-housing networks where divorced individuals blend their resources with friends and extended family members to recreate the communal social safety nets that the collapse of the traditional nuclear family dismantled. These emerging case studies indicate that the true legacy of the American divorce revolution is not the demise of the family, but the total democratization of the family structure. The contemporary American public has firmly rejected the concept of a one-size-fits-all model for domestic happiness. Individuals are reclaiming the absolute authority to define what a successful relationship means for themselves, balancing the profound human need for deep, enduring intimacy with an equally powerful demand for personal authenticity, mental well-being, and individual safety. The modern American love story has become an ongoing act of conscious creation, requiring individuals to actively negotiate their own boundaries, author their own contracts, and take full unvarnished accountability for their own emotional outcomes. As we look across the horizon toward the next decade of American life, this structural flexibility will continue to challenge our deepest cultural assumptions, reshaping everything from municipal zoning laws and corporate benefit structures to the psychological frameworks of the next generation of children. The journey from the rigid, fault-based courtrooms of the early 20th century to the hyper-rationalized, app-driven mediation rooms of 2026 has been a turbulent, multi-generational odyssey that has permanently altered the social landscape of the United States. It has stripped away the comforting illusions of institutional permanence, forcing us to gaze directly into the volatile, unpredictable reality of human attraction and commitment. But in doing so, it has also provided the American public with an extraordinary hard-won gift: the complete freedom to build relationships rooted not in systemic coercion, financial entrapment, or societal shame, but in genuine, uncoerced human choice. Yet, as this new era of hyper-customized partnership takes firm hold of the cultural mainstream, it raises a final gripping question that will define the next major societal conflict. As we completely sever the link between legal contracts and romantic intimacy, and as traditional marriage continues its structural decline, what new institutional forces will emerge to fill the profound spiritual and social void left behind in the heart of the nation? And how will a society built entirely on fluid, individualistic contracts protect itself from the creeping epidemic of systemic cultural isolation? The next great transformation of American society is already underway beneath the surface, and the battle lines for the future of human community are being drawn right now.